In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Giver of life. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning. It's wonderful to see you all here, and Happy New Year. This is, of course, our new liturgical year. The new church year begins today, first Sunday of Advent. I was at our annual Advent party last night over there in Farlander Hall. Daphne Vernon, our children and youth minister, was there along with a bunch of volunteers and children and parents. There was hot cider and chili and homemade cookies and snacks. There were wooden ornaments for the children to decorate and Advent wreaths to make. They had taken a bunch of pine boughs that were scattered over a table and assembled them themselves into beautiful Advent wreaths. And they made their own candles out of beeswax. A lovely time was had by all, I must say, making ornaments and wreaths. And then, toward the end of the evening, I noticed that some of the kids started taking these leftover pine boughs and taking them out into the courtyard where they arranged the boughs into a large spiral, which was a very simple labyrinth. And in the center of the spiral is about 15 feet across. In the center of the spiral, they placed a large white candle and lit it. It took a while to assemble this labyrinth, and I noticed that none of the adults were telling the children what to do at all, because we've been doing this for so long now, at least 8 or 9 years, that the older children, and by that I mean like the 9-year-olds, were teaching the younger children how to do it. And after a while, the labyrinth was ready, and the candle was lit at the center, and a bunch of chairs had been set up on the outside for all of us grown-ups to watch what was going on. It was a little bit cold last night, and the stars were out, and we could see our breath rising into the darkness. Someone brought out a CD player and put on a beautiful Advent song. And then the kids who had, up to this point, been very talkative and playful, now they all sat down and they became very quiet. And then each child had an apple, which they had decorated inside, and they had placed a candle in the center of the apple, so they were able to hold this candle, holding the apple like this. And then while everyone watched, each child, one by one, would take their candle and they would enter into the spiral, and they would go around and around in the spiral until they got to this little point of light in the middle. And then each child, as they made their way toward the center, would do it in their own style. Some were very casual, as if it were no big deal. I've done this a million times. Some were very self-conscious and nervous. Some of them were very businesslike. Some of them were very careful. But then each child would make their way into the center and then light their candle to the flame. And at that point, every child had the same kind of response. Their attention became completely fixed on this task, which was to light their little candle with the big candle in the middle. And each one would then walk back through the spiral, carrying their little candle along through the spiral, and then find a place where they would put the candle down on the ground to mark the path for the next child coming along. We were all very transfixed by this, watching these children as they were holding something very mysterious and important and a little bit dangerous, this burning flame, all by themselves holding this candle. And as each child made their way through the spiral, it seemed like they were being entrusted to carry something very precious, almost as if they were carrying a live baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. So after each child repeated this ritual, the ground was glittering with these points of light, these candles marking the way along the path into the center. And I thought, this is what we mean when we tell stories about God coming in the form of a child. A few years ago, I watched a very bad movie called Life or something like it, starring Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie plays this beautiful, glamorous reporter for the local news in Seattle. She has this perfect life. Her boyfriend is a famous baseball star. She's a local celebrity. Everything's going great. She even finds out that this network wants to hire her for this national morning show. And of course, everyone can see that despite her perfect little life, she isn't very happy. She's kind of hollow inside. She doesn't have anything resembling a spiritual life. And then this homeless guy, who also seems to be a psychic, comes up to her and tells her that she's going to die on Thursday. And so, of course, the movie becomes this meditation on how we change when we are finally forced to face the reality of our mortality. Some of us here today don't need a movie starring Angelina Jolie to know what it's like to be confronted by death. We know that story all too well. But for some others of us, this is still a question in the process of being answered. We look to our friends and our loved ones who have faced that dark night to be our teachers on this subject. I look to my brother Chris, who responded to the news of his imminent death by going around to everyone he knew and telling them exactly how much he loved them and thanking each of them for being in his life, which is, of course, a very common response. And I think it's proof of the existence of the soul, if not of God, that when we are directly confronted by our end, by our death, something inside of us expands, opens up, blossoms even. The priorities in our lives shift, and suddenly we care much more about our friends and our family and our loved ones. Back in Boston, there was a woman in my congregation who was just about the sourest lady on the planet. Her face had a kind of scrunched up look like she had been sucking on a lemon all her life. Everyone in my church tried to like her, but she made it just about impossible. And then she got very sick. And there I was one day in the hospital holding her hand after she got the news that she was going to die very soon. Her whole face had opened up. I almost couldn't recognize her. Her eyes were bigger, and they held my gaze. Her cheeks were rounder, and her brow was relaxed. And I got the impression that if I told a joke, she would actually laugh at it. And then she told me a joke, which I'd never heard her do before. And it's a joke I cannot repeat in polite company. It was very funny, though. And I thought, this is how she will be when I meet her in heaven. Her whole pure soul came into view. Well, I think those early Christians were just like that. They all believed as a natural fact that the end time was coming, and it was coming fast. And it just opened them right up. And then they discovered how much richer their lives were, how much more in love they were. Now that they knew that the end was near, how much more precious everything was. And that's when all the things that Jesus said began to make absolutely perfect sense. And so when they waited, and then they waited some more, and then they waited some more, and they waited some more until the end did not come, by that time it didn't even matter. Because by then they had discovered a kind of heaven on earth, a community of saints that poured out its love to one another with abandon. They began to see what it was like to live in a world in which the poor and the homeless, the widows and the orphans were treated with love and respect. They began to see what it was like to live in a world of nonviolence, a world in which all the military might of the Roman Empire was powerless. They began to catch a glimpse of Isaiah's vision of a world of peace, where nations beat their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. They got a sense of it because they were living it. And that's how we are living today. As I watched those little children kneeling down beneath those stars, touching their candle to that flame, I thought about Iran and Syria and all the folks who are working to rid the world of nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. I thought about the thousands of warheads still in this world and about all the people who are trying to get them decommissioned. I thought about the armies of peacemakers working now to create a world of peace rather than a world of war. They're still outnumbered. Their work is still tenuous and extremely difficult, like that little flame flickering in the night. But each time they make a tiny step toward another warhead being demolished, this vision of Isaiah's becomes a little bit more real. I thought about Isaiah's dream, and I imagined this little child beginning to catch this vision of world peace. And last night I saw a community of believers praying for that peace, praying for that child. And we all took a tiny little step together toward making it real. It's moments like that that help me to believe once again in this light that shines in the darkness. May we always remember that light, hold it close to our breast, and may it be for us a burning flame of love and compassion. Amen.